Welcome everyone to the Lofi Podcast. Today, my guest is Grammy-nominated lo-fi artist Saint Rumi, the man himself. Welcome.
Going on, man.
Yeah, this is such an honor to have you on the podcast. Just to have this title of someone who's got an album who's been nominated for a Grammy is absolutely crazy.
Well, actually, we were under consideration for Grammy nomination. I wish I could say that we were Grammy nominated. As my good friend Mike Odabashian said, if you get nominated for a Grammy, that goes on your headstone. But we were in consideration for a Grammy nomination in the category, and that alone is fantastic. So I'm happy.
Sorry, I went far ahead of myself there.
I appreciate it.
Yes. So, but here, tell us a little bit about yourself. Do you have any hobbies in life and so on besides lo-fi and making music? So, who are you?
Oh man, well, I wish I could say that I had lots of hobbies outside of music, but this music thing is kind of all consuming, and that, to be honest, that's why for a time I had been a touring musician for years and a singer-songwriter, and I was a singer and a neo soul artist, and I had been chasing that dream kind of like during that weird lull in the music industry when CD sales had dropped off, but streaming wasn't really a platform yet. YouTube was just kind of getting its legs, and it was tough to find an audience and make a living as a musician, but I was chasing that dream anyway, and it was so all-consuming for me, and I actually got to a point where I realized in my life that I didn't have any other hobbies or interests or passions, and that was a big reason why I took a step away from it, and went and got a full-time career in software engineering industry. So in my day job, I'm a software engineering manager, so technology is something that's definitely important to me as well, and it's kind of a cool thing about how technology and the internet has evolved in the time since, and how that brings us together as musicians now, and how that's changed from having to find collaborators locally who would be willing to be in a band with you to now working with people over the internet. So I find that really fascinating too. But since getting back into music, it's been it's been pretty consuming as well. But I've got my wife, and we both love animals, and so we just lost our dog of 15 years earlier this year, but we fostered a dog that we thought we were going to have for 2 weeks, and it turned out that he had skin cancer that had to be treated, and so they treated that, and he's now been with us for 5 months, and I think it's a foster fail, so we're probably keeping him. So
Yeah.
we got our dog Yoda, and so we're that's my life. Animals, lo-fi.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing. I myself am a dog person. I absolutely love dogs. Like, they're my favorite animal. So it's cool to hear that.
They're too good to us.
I know, they're so unconditionally loving as well. Like, they're just, oh man,
Pretty amazing.
I'm sitting here talking to you, and I just want to go and pet my dog right now.
I just love dogs. I love animals. I think all lives are precious, and it's cool to be the steward, the caretaker of another creature's life. So
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. So you kind of already answered my question of, when did you start getting into music? Like, you said that you were always into music and playing in bands and things.
Yeah.
So sort of, what did you start playing instruments, or did you start producing, or how did you grow into this lo-fi artist today?
So, yeah, I mean, interestingly, when I picked up guitar, I was 11 years old, and so like my mom and I were kind of living on pretty meager means. We didn't have much, but we had my mom's old guitar. So we didn't have cable TV. We didn't like when I was a kid. I didn't really have like video games or a lot of other things to entertain me. We were poor and didn't have a lot, but I had my mom's guitar, and I'll never forget like when I was like about 12, got my first computer. And right away, I figured out how to like record a song into the little like white Windows 95 microphone with that little like the little arm microphone that used to come with computers. I had one of those, and I got like a multi-track software for free that could do 2 tracks. So I had to record a couple of my first songs, and And so I just got into recording songs and recording the songs that I wrote almost immediately. And when I formed a band in junior high and high school, I expanded my recording equipment as best I could, buying used stuff, waiting for Guitar Center sales to come up. And I got like my first microphone and my first multi-track interface and met my first drummer and started kind of like recording and mixing and producing bands back then. And we're talking, this was like 1998, so early like home computer digital recording. There was no CD baby. There was no releasing your music on the internet. I would track stuff onto a computer, and then out of the back of the computer, I'd track it into a tape deck and hand manufacture cassettes and hand them out to people in school.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
that's about as lo-fi as it gets.
that's the real meaning of the word lo-fi. Like it's just, but there's something about cassette tapes though that are so just warm and personal. I mean, like they're low quality, but I still love them myself too. They're a
I
great
used
medium.
to. I remember that I used to like if there was a song that I loved, like I'll never forget it was, I don't know, probably 1997 or 98, 97, I want to say. Counting Crows' Long December was on the radio all the time, and I loved it, and I wanted to hear it a lot. So I got a cassette tape, and I just waited by the radio for it to come on, and I just recorded it onto cassette over and over every single time it came on. So I had a cassette tape filled with like 15 copies of Long December end to end. Like
Oh, that's amazing. Because I'm a naughties kid, and actually early 2010s as well. Yet I still did that as well with some of my old dad's music gear and things like that. So I can relate, and that is it's such an amazing thing to be able to get your cassette, stick it into the radio, and just make your own mixtape.
like your own mixtapes. Yeah. Oh man, I miss making mixtapes.
Yeah, bring back mixtapes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
That's
were
how I began.
yeah. So but you're playing music in a band. So like what genre was this band? So like it wasn't lo-fi. So
Yeah, I mean, I became interested in high school in jazz. Then in college, became especially interested in hip hop. So I mean, I've been a hip hop head for a long time, but I played guitar and sang. So I was kind of wasn't really sure where to find my place to make music. I had bands that I was in, kind of doing. I got into like gospel stuff. So I was always trying to kind of recreate what I heard, what I liked with bands, doing singer-songwriter stuff on acoustic guitar, singing, and then first day of freshman year, I met my friend Mike, who is my best friend, one of my best friends to this day, and he's a hip hop producer from the Bronx, and grew up in the Bronx and Pelham, New York, and like lifelong hip hop head also. And so I had my acoustic guitar and wanted to sing and do, and we this like neo soul thing was kind of becoming a thing. Like D'Angelo was becoming really big at the time. Erica Badu, and so we had this idea of like taking my acoustic singer-songwriting stuff and making beats to it, and he made the beats. So almost my whole life, he's always kind of been like the beat maker that I've known and worked with firsthand, and kind of brought this hip hop element to everything that I've done. And I always really loved and respected all of the sort of like the big beat makers. Jay Dilla, I've been a Dilla fan since long before probably anybody in the lo-fi scene ever heard of Dilla. uh, and I was always trying to weave elements of Dilla's beat making into my music through bands I was in and stuff like that. Like I was in a band that was kind of like a neo soul pop rock fusion band, and we always would just be like, Dilla's our biggest influence. And so yeah, like the genre was not in lo-fi, but as a guitar player, the guitar players that I listened to that influenced me were all neo soul guys. So that kind of just became de facto like what influenced my guitar playing style. And then I think it was actually when I was learning to write code, when I was becoming a software engineer, and I was listening to Dilla beat tapes while I would code. Everybody else was kind of listening to like ambient music or other background stuff. And this one kid that was in my class with me was another hip hop head, and I was like, dude, I wish there were more Dilla beat tapes. Like I'm getting tired of listening to them on repeat. And he goes, yo, have you never heard of lo-fi hip hop? It's like a whole genre on the internet of people beats inspired by Dilla. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I never. So he pointed me to the Chill Hop 24/7 stream. And that I started listening to that stuff, and I was like, oh my God, I think I might want to get back into music and make stuff like this, because this is everything that used to inspire me, but like a genre that's now popular on the internet. Oh my God.
Yeah, so this is how you discovered lo-fi then, and so you went and begun to start producing music. So like getting back into production after taking a break, was there like a learning curve to it, or did you just fit straight back in again?
Yeah, there was a big learning curve actually, and I kind of initially wanted to approach it as a purist because of my love of Dilla and Pete Rock and all the classic beat makers. I kind of felt like if I'm gonna do this, I should learn how to make beats on an MPC sampling vinyl. And so that was my initial approach. And for years before I ever even released anything as Saint Rumi or in like the, quote unquote lo-fi genre, I was just making like unreleasable, like sampling vinyl beats and just kind of like hanging out in like beat communities and stuff like that. And guys that were just, making beat tapes off of vinyl samples and sharing them with each other. So I did that for probably like 2 or 3 years before I ever even thought about releasing anything on Spotify as a lo-fi artist. But I did everything like very, very purist, like SP404, MPC. I owned a ton of hardware that I don't own anymore. And kind of took that approach when I got back into it. But for me, it was that I realized like I had become a software engineer. I had learned, how to do that technically. And before I became a software engineer, I actually owned arcades. So I became an arcade and pinball repair technician. I used to travel around and repair people's pinball machines. So I was like, if I can learn the technicalities of that, the MPC or beat making is also kind of it's a musical skill, but it's also a technical skill, and I've taught myself how to write code. I could probably teach myself how to use this, and it built my confidence to finally be able to approach beat making. Like I knew I had the feel, I knew I had the soul, I knew I had the music in me, but I just didn't know how to technically use beat making machines or samplers. So I kind of approached it like that, learning how to use them initially.
Yeah, but that's amazing that you yourself had the dedication to just sit there and figure out how to work it. Because I've been actually never used any of those hardware samplers. It goes straight over my head, all of that stuff. I'm a digital kid. And so whenever I see people who's able to use these pieces of analog or just even hardware gear, it just fascinates me and I have massive respect for you guys.
There's a there's a there's definitely a certain thing to kind of like learning it as a foundation because I think it gives you sort of like background perspective of everything that we're doing with lo-fi. But I will say that I've grown to believe that like all of that gear is completely unnecessary because the sort of like magic in the machine idea that I think people have, frankly, is I don't think it's real. Like it's just saturation and EQ. You can achieve it by learning how to mix, basically. And you can do everything that you can do with an MPC in your DAW, and have it sound like just as groovy, just as stanky, just as Dilla-ish. So uh, there's a lot of folks I think that buy into the sort of like, oh, I need to buy an MPC 3000 because that's what Dilla used. You don't. You don't.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. So, but you briefly mentioned there that you were with, before you released music online, you were producing with other beat makers as well, did you mention? Or
Yeah.
doing meetups and things like that? What was that like?
It was cool. I mean, most of them were online, and this was primarily just before and during the pandemic. Again, was kind of a thing that sort of like, in many ways, a blessing. It sort of um, forced me out of other parts of life and back into music and my interest in it. But Loop Sessions, which is based out of Montreal, but they had a Washington, D.C. chapter that met online. Flip a Beat Club, which is DiBiase's group that's based out of Sacramento, California, but they had an online thing. And then some Discord groups too. And for a while, I mean, I've been on Discord a long time. I didn't know about any of the sort of like lo-fi label communities on Discord until much later. But there were a lot of beat making groups on Discord, people that I found through Reddit communities and stuff like that. And just guys that I met online that kind of had those groups of sharing, doing monthly sample flips, and that's the other thing too. I wasn't as prolific in the beginning. I would maybe make a beat a month, at most.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's good. Like you're able to produce with others online now, but I've noticed that you've actually also done some production with people in person. Like I've saw like Instagram photos of those LI lo-fi or LA lo-fi meetups where you rented out a place and made beats together for a while. Like, how does that compare in comparison to doing things online? Like, do you prefer making beats with people in person, or do you prefer working on your own and sending things over the internet?
Well, as the former band guy and 90s kid that I am, I think I will always prefer making music with people in person. There's definitely a special magic to it. I mean, the internet, what's great about it is that it facilitates us to be able to make music online, you know? And I will say that when I met up with the guys in LA, there was a benefit to the fact that we had been making music together online for quite some time, for like over a year. And so we understood each other's skills and idiosyncrasies and how we worked. So once we got together in person, it just was like, let's go, magic, you know?
Just like the
Uh,
magic flowed, like.
yeah. And like, I don't know. So, and then I don't know, maybe, I can't remember, probably about 8, 9 months ago now, I discovered that one of our fellow Jazz Hop Cafe artists, Taki Brano, we were chatting in the Brunch Collect server. And at the time, Corey, who runs Brunch Collect, had been talking about and thinking about moving to Maine. And he mentioned it. And Taki said something like, "Oh, you'll be just a couple hours north of me." And I was like, "Yeah, he'll be a couple hours north of me too. Where are you?" And he said, "Providence, Rhode Island." And I was like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. What are you talking about? That's crazy." Because I don't know. I think there's maybe 30, 40 people in the US as part of Jazz Hop Cafe. And like one of them lives up the street from me, literally, you know. So we started getting together on Mondays in person and working on tracks together. And there's just really something about like knowing each other's workflow, and we get together and we just like crank ideas out. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, if possible, you'd highly recommend that artists could meet up and even make music together. Like,
Yeah,
wow,
there's
that's
there's nothing
amazing.
like it, man. There's really nothing.
Yeah. So, I mean, for us people in Europe and things like that, maybe we'll have to organize some sort of lo-fi meetup somewhere and
And
get
I'll be
some
there. I'll,
beats
I'll
cooking.
fly there. I would really go anywhere in the world for this. So
That is absolutely amazing. That's something we're going to have to work on.
and you guys are kind of fortunate too. In Europe, you have a much higher concentration of beat makers in a smaller geographic area. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of opportunities, I think, in Europe for you guys to capitalize on that for sure.
That
Yeah.
would be absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So as well as being a lo-fi artist, you do some work with lo-fi labels. You do A&R and things like that. How do you find that working on the other side of things? Like, so you make the music as well, but also working for the artists at the label. Does that change your perspective in any way of being a beat
Yeah.
maker?
My college degree is in music business from Northeastern University. And so I got that degree initially thinking that I would be working for record labels or working in the music industry as a producer. And then I ended up really just using my education to be the front man of my own touring band for years. And so I've got this degree on the shelf that, I would love to still do something with, and I like being involved on the industry side of things. Having having done the songwriter grind for a very long time too, I did a lot of work in sync and licensing and that kind of stuff. So I know a lot about that stuff. Running a label is no joke. It's extremely time consuming. Takes away a lot from your ability to be an artist, frankly. And so it's one of those things where for me, what I feel the best thing about it is, and my concern always has been about just creating opportunities for other artists. That's what I want. And so, I've every single thing that I've done so far, Brunch Collect, Chill Space, right now working on with my buddy Cucamello, who you probably also know. We're working on launching another label collective, actually pulling a few labels together. And so I'm excited about that. I don't think I can say much more about it right now, but very soon we will be able to, and it's gonna be very exciting. But the basis has always been to hopefully try to create some opportunities for artists to grow from, because those need to exist. And as the label atmosphere changes and the Spotify atmosphere changes, and I think that some opportunities that used to exist are kind of closing off or tightening up. I want to make sure that those opportunities continue to exist for artists to feel like they have a place to launch from.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And, thank you so much for people like you who work on the label side of things for the artists and who are artist minded. I suppose being an artist yourself as well, you have sort of the understanding of what it means to be a producer as well and to make songs and make beats. And so you're able to see where we're coming from and you're able to sort of work with that whenever you're working on the more, legal and label side of things.
It's also helped me to understand where other A&R are coming from too when I'm sending them work, And for a label to be successful, they have to have the avenue through which to promote your music, whether or not they like your track. That you could send them something that's like so crazy and so sick and they love it, but if they don't feel like they have an avenue to promote it and make it successful, they probably can't accept it. And so they're going to lean on you to kind of like make that investment in yourself and your music and sort of show that there can be an avenue for it. Labels invest a lot of money and time, or hopefully they do. There are some that don't, but the best labels invest a lot of time and money to creating these avenues of promotion for our music. And so I get that understanding as well of kind of like where the A&R are coming from. And so sometimes when I get a rejection or an acceptance, or if I'm making something and thinking about where I might like to release it, I can kind of put myself in the A&R seat a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually talking to a Cucamello about this recently as well too, and like his advice that he was giving to sort of smaller lo-fi artists is that like to understand the labels to who you're submitting your tracks to, because no matter how good the track is, if it doesn't fit that label's vision, they're not going to accept it. So
Right.
you have to be wise with what you're doing. And like, do you have any words of wisdom yourself for maybe some lo-fi artists who are starting or budding and are trying to figure out this whole label scene? Like, how should they go about?
Uh, my advice is contradictory and twofold.
Okay.
The first aligns with what you just said and what Cucamello has said, which is think about what the labels are looking for in terms of what fits what they're releasing. The second is ignore that advice completely and experiment and find out who you are and your personal individual voice. I think that if there's any downside to the sort of like industry that has developed around lo-fi, it's that uh, people have realized that they can become successful by imitating what exists. And they do this before they find their personal voice, rather than having a personal voice first and then trying to tweak and craft that personal voice to something more marketable. That's a bit more ideal to me. It's like, okay, so I can say this coming like from an A&R perspective as well. If you work for a label that gets to a point where you're getting a lot of submissions all the time, I'd say about 80% of submissions that I hear sound exactly the same, and I can almost tell in the first 30 seconds, and I'm just like, sorry, not a fit. Um, you maybe there are some labels out there that are looking for very homogenous stuff. They want sort of their imprint on it. I'm looking for stuff that fits a certain profile that I know I can promote through playlists, but I want to hear that person in the music. And so I think it's important to develop a personal voice, understand really intimately like what your skills are, and also what your interests are too. Like what was the music that brought you to lo-fi, that was kind of like the gateway? Was it that you really liked sort of like indie emo stuff, and then the more indie emo side of lo-fi appealed to you? If so, maybe dig into those strengths. Don't worry about the fact that Jazz Hop Cafe is having a whatever, like a Christmas EP or something. Don't worry about that. Dive into the side of it that really inspires you. Figure out what your personal voice is. Worry about crafting yourself for the labels later.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. The fact that you say that, because I find that a lot of people are just making this, the words you use, like homogenous, just like this really boring, repetitive sort of. It's not them because they're trying to emulate other people, and I think artists really need to find out who they are, where they come from, where they sort of take inspiration from first, and to sort of discover what their strengths are. And so, like, for you yourself, what do you find that you get inspiration from in order to produce what you make? Like, what do you take aspects from?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, like I am more like I just personally music wise am interested in hip hop. So the fact that lo-fi is instrumental hip hop sort of at its basis makes it not too different, frankly, from what I like personally music wise. And I like neo soul music. And I also really like very experimental indie folk stuff that almost weaves electronic in, sort of in that vein of Bon Iver. Um, I mean, Bon Iver is probably my favorite artist of all time. Justin Vernon is just because of how he experiments with sort of the same things that we use in lo-fi, like weird samplers, sounds. He uses his DAW as an instrument. So I love that about him and how that expresses itself through that indie folk, indie country kind of music. So for me, that's like I think we learn traditional instruments like guitar has existed for hundreds of years, piano hundreds of years. We learn these traditional instruments. People that are using modern technology to twist and manipulate those things, whatever the genre might be, like that's sort of what interests me and inspires me the most.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for saying that. And so, before we move on to like another question, are there any specific artists or songs that you might want to just share with anyone who's listening that you might, just some music that you like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny because I just turned 40 this year, and i- for anybody who's in their mid 20s, you end up thinking that 40 is very far away, and it's not. And when you get there, despite the fact that you have some like aches in your knee and your ankle, you still feel very young. And you when you're 40, you actually feel like the social gap between yourself and people in their 20s is a lot smaller. And so oftentimes in the lo-fi scene, I take for granted and I forget that a lot of folks are much younger than me, and actually they may not know a lot about the catalogs of many of the artists that kind of that led to lo-fi hip hop becoming a thing. And so there are some hip hop artists, some producers, and some neo soul artists that really were kind of like foundational to the beat making and hip hop movement that eventually became lo-fi hip hop. And so for folks that have not listened to a lot of D'Angelo and have not listened to a lot of Erica Badu, have not listened to a lot of Music Soul Child, that's neo soul stuff at its core. But that was when artists, R&B artists in particular, were kind of reaching back to analog gear and 60s and 70s soul inspired songwriting and production techniques and then fusing in hip hop. And so I think that that's a really cool thing that happened with R&B and soul music at that time that is not dissimilar from kind of like what we're doing with lo-fi, which is, instead of just sort of resting laurels on the foundation of like sampling jazz through samplers and making beats, lo-fi is able to pull in all these different influences and fuse it with hip hop. And I think that that's something that's really cool. So going back to those sort of like initial artists that kind of paved the way, Jay Dilla was explicitly involved in their careers as well. So I think it's a something good for people to check out. And again, like I kind of take for granted that everybody I know knows those artists and listens to them and listened to them in the early 2000s. And so if folks are not familiar with their catalogs, they should definitely get up on that. Listen, also listen to artists like Prince and Stevie Wonder who played multiple instruments, played all their instruments, produced their own records. Like listen to early Prince records. It's him playing every single instrument. He laid down the drums to no click track and then recorded songs over. I mean, again, as lo-fi as it gets, like the guy in his bedroom making music has existed for a very long time. So Prince, Stevie, like those guys are foundational.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. So it's just really getting back to the roots of things and sort of working from there and seeing where sort of lo-fi has come from and where it's growing from, and things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Absolutely.
It's really interesting what you were just talking about, people listening and going back to the roots of lo-fi and hearing where it came from. But of late, I have seemed to notice that lo-fi as a genre is kind of changing a little bit. People are sort of implementing their own take to it, and their own sort of twists and incorporating other genres of music and styles. Have you noticed this? And do you think like lo-fi is shifting in any way?
No, it's interesting, man. I mean, at the end of the day, um, the interesting thing about lo-fi as a genre and as a type of music is that although it stems from the hip hop tradition, as does a lot of sort of sampled electronic music, and there's a lot of kind of crossover there. At the end of the day, as an instrumental genre, it is an electronic music genre. And so there's a lot of room for interpretation there. And even like, my buddy Jesse, C for C, right? Like, his interpretation of folk hop and infusing folk music with hip hop. And so there's all these opportunities there to sort of like have this fusion. And I think the beautiful thing about it is that in the context of modern music, you know, as revolutionary as jazz was to the world and stemmed off into rock and all of these other genres, hip hop has been pretty transformative too as a genre. And it, it sort of uh, had the influence that it's had on electronic music. So I think that, as a genre, lo-fi may not continue to resemble the original intent of lo-fi hip hop, but ultimately it's electronic music. And so it's going to go where it goes, and like I've noticed a lot of lo-fi producers recently have also kind of gotten into making house music and lo-fi house, and it's in many ways lo-fi house is almost like just more upbeat, higher tempo lo-fi, but similar drums, similar sort of like chillness to it, but also like we kind of like forget that prior to lo-fi becoming a genre, there also was chill out as a genre, and there were a lot of really cool artists doing that sort of stuff. It's very interesting talking to Rod Linham, Rod from Datco, or Lo-Fi Rod as they call him, because he was really big, really instrumental in the chill out scene and bringing electronic music to the major labels and stuff when he did in like the early 2000s. And so yes, like he's had a whole career with that, and then got interested in the lo-fi scene. So to say that lo-fi is shifting, maybe it's just expanding.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not shifting, but it's expanding. Like that's something I've never thought of before. So I'll have to have a sit down sometime and sort of see where my mind goes with these thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, so but I think it's good that, people are working and incorporating, their roots into what they make because, it's yeah, as you say, it expands and it brings sort of a breath of fresh air. And then other people can then take inspiration from what's made and it becomes a whole chain reaction where, we can just come up with something entirely new.
I mean, we are a global music genre, and so what's amazing about that and awesome about that is that we are going to infuse influences from people all over the world naturally, and that's very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That is fantastic. So, my last little question for you before we wrap up now is I noticed that you were playing lo-fi live at the Lo-Fi Festival. How was that? And do you think it should be done more? Because I've never associated lo-fi as a genre that, is played live and in person. But what do you think of it? And like, should we encourage more meeting up of artists in person?
So, I mean, it's interesting, man, that you say that. The the presence of instrumental hip hop in live settings obviously took a nosedive during the pandemic, like many other things. And that's also kind of around the time that lo-fi really found its footing as this like big, genre that the masses were discovering. But like I was going to beat showcases in Brooklyn back in 2006. Like beat makers playing their beats from their samplers live in certain settings has actually been a thing for as long as hip hop has been around. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, hip hop was born at the block party in the Bronx, DJ Kool Herc spinning the breaks and cutting the breaks back and forth for MCs to rhyme over and people to dance to in a live setting. So that's always been the thing. And beat makers have always kind of found a place where they could go showcase their beats and show off their talents. So if anything, I think that, maybe people are starting to curate those spaces again. I know that the guys from the Lo-Fi Festival, who I believe are based in the UK, they've been, at it for several years now, trying to have this yearly festival in some of the bigger cities. And this year they expanded it out to more cities, which is why they included Boston and why we did that one. But yeah, I know they're trying to kind of like uh, build a sort of central hub for encouraging people to get out there and be showcasing lo-fi as a live thing more often. But yeah, if it finds its way back to that, that's great, but I would say it's nothing new.
Yeah, no, well, you've just completely shown my ignorance of the whole thing because,
No, not at all.
like, yeah, because I've always just associated lo-fi as something entirely different from instrumental hip hop, and talking to you this evening, with this interview has, it's brought a whole light to it, and where I really need to check out the roots of this whole genre as well and see where it's come from, where it's growing, like the stems of it all. So thank you so much. It's been really insightful talking to you this evening.
Awesome, man.
Yeah. So, yeah, before I head on, where can we find you? Are you online, your socials, anything like that?
Yeah, you'll find me heavy involved on Instagram for sure at Beat Saint Rumi. That's sort of my main hub. And as you know, I'm active in all the Discord communities, so folks will see me on there and see me out there. And like, please always give me a holler. I'm
Yeah.
here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It was fantastic speaking to you. And so I hope you have a great time.
Awesome, man.
Here, all the best.
Thanks, dude. See you soon, man.